Welcome to episode 3 of the Year of the Movie podcast, the podcast where we discuss movies that were released in 2023.
Woo!
Whoa.
We're full of energy.
But something that's different about today's episode is we have a different setup. We're in a different location, which will probably change again at some point as well.
Spoilers.
But we also have different cameras. We have a whole multi-view thing going on. So here's my camera, and then maybe we'll get. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie's camera.
Neat.
Wow. And then the wide shot, and we'll probably just mainly stick to the wide shot, but it's just fun to have a whole little thing here. So welcome back if you've been here before, and welcome to the first time viewers. Maggie, why did we start this podcast?
We started this Year of the Movie podcast because it's a goofy year for movies. Before strikes even happened, starting strong with 65, of
65
course.
65 was the
Cocaine
best.
Bear. 65 was. And we just wanted to cover this weird year in movies, especially considering last year was like a lot of quality stuff came out.
Yeah.
And this year, we're getting there. It's August now.
Barbie and Oppenheimer have now come out at this point,
Yeah.
but it's been goofy.
There's not much else out there that's like high quality stuff, though as mainstream as those are.
Yeah. So today's episode is a Netflix release movie. So I think it's our first
Netflix original.
Netflix original streamer,
Yeah.
direct to streaming. We Have a Ghost,
Mm-hmm.
which since it's come out, I have not really heard anyone talk about it.
Nope.
Um,
I saw some buzz for the trailer.
yeah.
I guess, do you remember your initial impressions when you first heard about the trailer or the movie?
I mean, when I heard about the movie, I just saw David Harbour as a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I saw the trailer, I was definitely excited because one, it looked fun, like it looked goofy, but then it also has Tig Notaro in it.
Mm-hmm.
And something I guess you guys should just know is that we're big fans of Tig Notaro, especially when Tig Notaro shows up in movies because it's a newer kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so I was definitely excited for it when the trailer came out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was one that we watched pretty much as soon as it came out.
Yeah.
I mean, it was easier, obviously, because it was on a streamer.
Yeah, I think that's probably why. Because otherwise, obviously, since this podcast started in July, then we've delayed with
Yeah.
pretty much the rest of them.
So, for those of you who don't know what We Have a Ghost is about, the synopsis of that one is finding a ghost named Ernest haunting their new home turns Kevin's family into overnight social media sensations. But when Kevin and Ernest go rogue to investigate the mystery of Ernest's past, they become a target of the CIA.
Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. It's a ghost.
Before we really talk about the trailer, I kind of want to talk about my review for it that I put because I read it to remind me on Letterboxd or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it begins with, I keep saying 2023 is the year of the movie.
That's true.
It really is. And I say that this film backs that up. And I have some things that I can touch on later, but it's just it was a really well-made movie.
Mm-hmm.
The soundtrack is really good.
Mm-hmm.
All of the actors really nail it. But the main thing that I thought that really made this a fun movie was that it was a movie that felt like it was fun to make, and it was just a fun movie. And I feel like if this had been a movie that had come out in the 80s, it would have been a classic.
Mm-hmm.
But because there's just so much content now,
Yeah.
and it was a Netflix original, I think it's unfortunately going to be a movie that kind of doesn't really get remembered too much.
Yeah. It definitely has the feel of the 80s classic wacky family movie, but then also injecting social media and technology of 2023 is a huge part of this movie.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, watching it 5 to 10 years from now, how it'll feel. If it'll still feel like a classic.
Yeah. So the way that this podcast works is that the first half is kind of talking about what's in the trailer, and then we get to spoiler territory where we kind of talk about like what happens in the movie and our thoughts and everything. So if you don't want to listen to that part, just listen to us when we say spoiler time and stop listening. But for now, we will discuss the trailer. So do you want to talk about that?
So it starts off with like a kind of a typical horror movie feeling where there's a lot of like that very specific piano music and ghost sounds, and a couple is buying an old house and wondering what the history of it is. And then it's a pretty simple setup of Kevin, the main character, is the new kid in town. He finds out that the place that he's moved to is haunted, and other kids call it the House of Death, which, not the most creative nickname. Seems pretty on the nose.
Yeah, I've known high schoolers to be more creative than just House of Death.
Brag. So then we see Kevin investigating the house at night. Spooky music continues. He finds a ghost, Ernest, in the attic. Ernest does like the ghost noises at him, trying to scare him. And then instead of being scared, Kevin laughs. We see a vertical video that he's shooting on his phone. And then Ernest storms off, and then the tone of the trailer changes into more of a comedy. We see Kevin's family finding out about Ernest. They have varying responses. The mom is freaked out about it. Kevin's dad posts a clip of Ernest online. It goes viral, and there's a seemingly instant, overwhelming response that there is a real confirmed ghost. There are people in their front lawn with signs. A guy dressed like Jesus is there.
And the dad in the trailer, like you can see, like is posting the video in a closet or something.
Yeah, he's doing this in secret.
Yeah, which is interesting.
We'll skip and come back to that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in the trailer, he says to the kids, "Don't tell your mom."
Yeah.
And then he's secretly posting. So
says,
either the mom is anti-ghost or anti-social media.
Both, I guess.
Yeah.
Or in this one, more specifically anti-ghost, because he says, "Don't tell your mom, she'll freak out." And then we see her meeting Ernest, and she freaks out.
Yeah.
Which is fair. It's a ghost in your house. Anyway, Kevin, we see forming more of a personal connection to Ernest. He tries to like shake his hand. He tries to find out more about him. We learned that Ernest can't speak, and he has some sort of mysterious past that he can't remember. We see him seemingly dead on the ground outside of the house at one point, very briefly. Kevin encourages Ernest to go outside. We see him freaking people out that are all on the lawn, and then running through walls of various businesses. So it's not typical ghost rules where he's rooted to the place. He's allowed to go outside.
Yeah.
And then the CIA is there. So
which the CIA seems to be headed by, or at least this group of the CIA is headed by Tig Notaro.
Yeah.
So what we know about Tig Notaro's character is that she works for the government.
Yeah. Tig Notaro shows up and she's like, "Our orders are to apprehend the ghost." And so
straight from the top.
Yeah, Tig Notaro and the Ghost Police try and capture Ernest.
That's a great band name.
Yeah, I'll add it later. They try and get Ernest. Kevin and his friend from school, who I don't remember her name right now, and it doesn't mention it in the trailer, but it shows them on the run. They talk about being outlaws. And then there's just a lot of quick cuts after that of like characters interacting with police. Ernest goes into a cop car at one point. There's like a lot of high-speed chases, flashing lights. Everything gets a little more chaotic and the plot becomes less obvious from the images. And then the last sequence that they show is Jennifer Coolidge's character, who is a medium, and it's her visiting the House of Death to shoot an episode of her show.
She's like a TV medium specifically.
Yeah, like Long Island medium type of vibe. And then Kevin asks Ernest if he wants to have some fun, and then Ernest purposefully scares Jennifer Coolidge by like melting his face and turning things on and off and that kind of stuff. And then you see Jennifer Coolidge jump out a window.
I like that the order of your description is that the melting of the face was fine, but it was when Ernest turned stuff on and off that Jennifer Coolidge is like,
her last
no, that's not going to do it for me, dog.
She knows her limits. Who am I to judge? So those are all the shots in the trailer, basically. It's pretty clear that, like we said, that technology and social media specifically are a big factor in the story. And then just from the trailer, after the social media element is introduced, then the plot gets less, obviously, like a horror movie, and it becomes more into the family comedy vibe.
Maybe, I feel like the pitch for this movie was, what if we make Casper the Friendly Ghost, but the ghost is played by David Harbour, and he is just a full-grown adult.
I don't have much on the pitch of the actual movie, but I do have a couple of interesting production facts about how it was made and the director that we can get to later after we talk about what we think about the movie. It does seem like, I think, like you said earlier, that it seems like everyone had a pretty good time making it, or like it seems like a fun movie. And that's kind of the vibe that this director gives off for most things that he works on.
Yeah.
So
so what we thought of the movie. I mean, I've kind of already said it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's a goofy, enjoyable movie.
Yep.
It tries to do some things.
Yeah.
And it certainly doesn't always land.
It's one of those movies that, like, I'm not a huge champion of social media.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty obvious. If you look up my stuff online, then there's not a lot there. Accounts are mostly private, that kind of thing. But this movie does that same shorthand thing of an outside, newer, contemporary element is threatening the traditional family structure, and we have to come together despite it. And it's I don't know if social media is that black and white. It's kind of a tool. And even the trailer points out, their video goes viral and the dad says that's money. There are a lot of opportunities with social media too. The stuff that we're trying to do, having a more online audience, social media is a huge aspect of that, unfortunately. So it's not a bad take. It's just not a nuanced one, which isn't a huge deal.
Definitely wasn't I don't think this movie's purpose was to be think about your social media use and how it affects the world. But it is just...
tagline isn't Instagram bad.
Yeah. I did think that when watching it that it kind of depicted social media in a somewhat accurate way of just people like really sharing and viral and like getting on the trend. Like there was a TikTok trend called like the Ernest or something in the movie. That's not a spoiler thing. That's fine. But I also think it should be pointed out that the dad in this movie is played by Anthony Mackie, who is Falcon and like the MCU and like a bunch of other stuff, obviously. But like, I don't know, he's this sort of in touch, out of touch dad, and I just don't know if Anthony Mackie is quite like the casting that I would have gone with. Like he did a great job, and like Anthony Mackie is great, but it like when I think Anthony Mackie, I don't think father of two teenage sons, who's money when for social media.
So this story is based off of a short story called Ernest, and in I believe it's called Ernest. In the short story, apparently the dad is not a lovable character. So when they were trying to turn this into a movie, then they were like, we have to make the dad likable and make his position much more sympathetic than it is in the story, where I guess he's just trying to exploit the ghost. I don't know much about the short story itself. But in this, it's understandable, like a lot of horror movies where a family buys a house and then there are ghosts, but then they end up staying there, then it's like there's a lot of financial ties into the place, and they make that very clear in the movie. And then he's much more motivated as like the head of the family. They have a bunch of scenes talking about that. Is like he's very concerned about taking care of his family, and this is a way that he can do that. And he is the first one to jump on the bandwagon of like, yeah, let's have Jennifer Coolidge come to the house, and what are the merch opportunities, and what kind of brand deals can we do with Ernest?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So obviously we've mentioned people in it. Mm-hmm. Anthony Mackie, Tig Notaro, Jennifer Coolidge, David Harbour. Those were really the only 4 actors that I truly like knew. Kevin is played by a kid that was in a Netflix show called Everything Sucks.
Jackie DeAllo Winston. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Everything Sucks was a really cool show. It was only a season. It took place in like the 90s. I'm pretty sure that's where Sydney Sweeney got her start, or like that was one of the first things that I had seen her in, at least. So like that's how I knew him. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, the people in the movie I didn't really know, which like makes sense for like a Netflix streaming movie that does have 3 really big names right now, and Tig Notaro. Yeah. Which Tig Notaro unfortunately isn't the big name that I wish she was, but I'm sure she doesn't want to be a big name either. She
like is obviously a very recognizable person, but it's fair to say that she doesn't have the star power equivalent of Anthony Mackie in Marvel stuff and David Harbour in Stranger Things.
And also Marvel stuff.
And also Marvel stuff now, yeah. There was a interview that I found of David Harbour talking about horror. They also specifically call him a horror actor in the interview, which I didn't really think of until I was thinking about his career. And like I forget that people call Stranger Things a horror show.
I never think of it as one.
Yeah. But then also Violent Night. And,
yeah,
and I believe a couple other things.
Which we will also be talking about, right? Or no, that was 2022.
That was 2022.
Never mind, we won't be talking about Violent Night. Get it out your brains. Yeah. But we will be talking about 65 in every episode.
Legally, yeah. So David Harbour was talking about why horror is an important genre. He says, first of all, I do think it's the only place where you can have social commentary, because you can have racism be expressed as an alien creature in a world like that. You see District 9, you're dealing with incredible social commentary there. Also, I think there's something within us that desires a mythical experience. I mean, our lives are somewhat mythic. The fact that we can conceive of our own death is a pretty crazy thing for a creature to walk around with. I think that we're all striving for this transcendence. Comic book heroes, or even the horror genre, overcoming a monster contain this transcendent experience. I certainly like it, and I think a lot of people do. It's always interesting to me to hear people talk about horror and like the thought that goes into it, when I feel like people consider it like a pretty cheap genre.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I'm not. It's known about me that I'm not a huge horror fan. Yeah. I think it's
really easy to do a bad horror movie.
Yeah, and like if we ever talk about horror movies, which we'll end up having to because they released this year, we'll at least have a guest, or I won't even be here, because like I really just don't like horror films. So like I'm not going to be able to discuss it, I think, in a fair way, because I'll be like, yeah, it's a horror film, I guess.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. He also talked about the surprising difficulty playing a character who doesn't speak. And
that is a big he never talks in the movie as the ghost.
Yeah. He saying how like at first it was a joke with his friends of like, oh, that's really easy, you don't have any lines you need to memorize, and then afterwards it's like you actually have to figure out the emotion that you're conveying through the scene only using your face. That's very difficult.
Yeah.
Acting. Who would have thought? Mostly talked about, I think, more production things than spoiler things. So I don't know if there's anything specifically in the movie we want to mention. Spoiler zone now.
Yeah, I would say this is probably the spoiler zone. Welcome to the spoiler zone. Get a little cool graphic. A bunch of engines revving, and then you see spoilers on cars and like buses and motorcycles. They all have spoilers, and it's just spoiler zone. That's free for the audience. So like, I don't know, like we talked about like the social media aspect, but I do feel like this movie was considerably deeper than I expected.
Yeah.
Because like they find out why David Harbour is a ghost.
He was killed.
And yeah, he was killed by his best friend.
Yeah, and like a weird. It was more. I was more surprised by how he died than I expected I would be.
His best friend and his best friend's wife killed him and stole his daughter because they wanted a daughter. And they were like, the only way we can do it, I guess, is to kill Ernest.
Like, Ernest, who wasn't named Ernest, but he was wearing a bowling shirt when he died that said Ernest on it, and then forgot his name. So now I forget his name. But as a human, then his wife left him. So then he was a single father. And then what they told their kidnapped daughter then when growing up was like her dad was an alcoholic. He just got overwhelmed once her mom left and couldn't take it anymore, and then they were like, he tried his best, but he knew when he needed to leave, and then they never heard from him again, or that's what they claimed at least.
And like they throughout the movie like drop little like clues and hints and stuff of like what's happening and like add to the mystery being solved, but it still like it really was like a not expected thing. Because you meet his best friend, like they find the best friend super old now because he died like 50 years ago.
Ernest was borrowed his shirt, so then they tracked down the shirt through like the bowling league, and then they were like, oh, he's still alive, it must be a mistaken identity or something, and then it's Kevin and his friend who talked to him or something. And you're like, oh, that's wild, but then like Ernest starts to remember things and remembers that he was killed, and like that was unexpected and just pretty emotional. And there's also a scene at the end of the movie where Ernest, still as a ghost, meets his now fully grown daughter, and it's very emotional. And he says goodbye to her before he leaves this mortal plane.
But there was also a weirdly emotional scene with Tig Notaro, because like she's supposed to be like this bad guy ghost catcher, but then we learn that she's not bad. She's just genuinely interested in ghosts, and unfortunately, the CIA is the way that she can get closer.
So she also doesn't have nearly as much power as the trailer kind of sets her up to have. Where she's in this ghost department.
There's a ghost in here, apparently. We just heard a weird noise.
Neat. Special guest.
David Harbour's ghost, everybody.
So there is a ghost department within the CIA, but it was discontinued or something because it's a ghost department.
And they didn't find anything.
Yeah. And then the Ernest video goes viral, and then I don't even know if she's technically an agent anymore at that point.
No, she's like an author and like self-publisher, self-researcher into like the paranormal.
Yeah, so then kind of works her way back into the CIA with the Ernest evidence, and then is able to convince them to give her some sort of authority, because then there's the whole thing of like the special ops team crashing into the guy who killed Ernest's house, and they shoot him with their ghost guns.
Shoot Ernest with the ghost gun, and they capture Ernest, and like then Ernest is all locked up, and that makes Kevin sad because Ernest is Kevin's friend, and he just moved to the city.
Their family is also detained at one point by the CIA, and then the CIA takes over the house and like sets it up as a base camp, and then by that point Tig Notaro is kind of walking around like, I'm really sorry that I'm here and making this happen.
And then there's a like really emotional scene between Tig Notaro and David Harbour, where Tig Notaro like just wanted to meet a ghost, and like this was her life's mission. I think she maybe saw a ghost as a kid or something that like led to this. And like she starts kind of like tearing up when she's with David Harbour, and then lets David Harbour go.
Because he was in ghost prison.
He was in a ghost prison. And I don't know, like, obviously you need like emotional scenes in a good movie, and I think that's what made this a good movie. But I just wasn't expecting it. Like, I was still expecting like a fun, silly movie with these actors, but like just like having the emotional scenes and the crying and everything, like I just wasn't really expecting that in Netflix's We Have a Ghost.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it took itself pretty seriously.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's really more in terms of spoilers and stuff of just like what we thought. Like, I think it's obvious we liked this movie.
I think Kevin and his friend from school, they do start dating.
Yeah.
It's, you know, kind of follows the family movie pattern that way of like boy and girl from school will like each other, but
new kid in town meets
weird girl,
weird reject.
yeah. But they do make it pretty clear like they have a decent amount in common, and they do actually like each other as people. It doesn't feel
like
forced.
She still had character.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just like she's there.
Yeah.
Right? Like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Good.
Kevin has a brother. We haven't talked about him at all.
Yeah, there is a brother. He's like the typical older sports, like, kind of bro brother, and like at one point he doesn't pick Kevin up from school or drive him to school or something.
He's pretty standard. He's really not in the movie as much as like they don't focus on like the sibling dynamic nearly as much as they focus on the parent son dynamic, especially with Anthony Mackie. I think they have more scenes than with the mom, Erica Ash.
One thing I didn't like, at least I'm remembering it this way, is they did the classic, they moved to a new house that is just like a really cool house, but the kid doesn't like it because it's new and it's not like what he considers home.
I thought he didn't like it because they moved around so much.
Yeah. But like,
it is a cool house.
It is a really cool house.
Yeah.
Like, it's a giant house, and it's cheap because people call it the House of Death, and no one wanted to buy it. But it is just like a really cool house. It's like in, this is going to be a great reference.
Okay.
The Steve Martin Cheaper by the Dozen movie.
Correct.
When they move into a new house, and the redhead kid who is like the black sheep of the family that everyone kind of makes fun of gets stuck with a bedroom in the turret of this house, and there's stained glass, and the kid is like, I hate my new room, but also in this room is a slide from the room to outside, and the kid is like, I hate my new room. And I'm just like, you have by far the coolest room of any house ever. Like, I just don't know why you're complaining. It's just, I wish that wasn't a trope. Like, I know like the kid has to like have growth, and that like he's not happy, but then through these wacky hijinks he becomes happy. But like, I think it's okay if the kid is like, the house is cool. I wish we didn't move around so much, and we're probably gonna move around again, but the house is cool.
I guess there's a ghost now. That's fine. Yeah.
Oh, and like Anthony Mackie's character, the dad. Like, I don't feel like we've talked enough about that. Like, his whole character is that he always finds new schemes and new jobs, which is why they move around a bunch.
That's true.
Like, it's not like he's a military dad, and like they're going to different like bases or whatever. It's just like
he always goes all in the next thing that he finds of like, this is gonna make us everything.
Yeah.
And his wife is always pretty supportive of him
for whatever reason.
Yeah, which I think she's definitely portrayed as the more stable parent.
Yeah.
Not that Anthony Mackie isn't stable, but he is like the less, I guess he is kind of like the fun dad thing, and then the mom has to be the realistic one, which is also a pretty common dynamic that's portrayed.
Yeah.
So.
Was this movie Successful?
It's hard to tell
Because it's Netflix.
It's Netflix.
Yeah.
So it was released February 24th, 2023 on Netflix. It's 127 minutes, which I don't think we've talked about runtime a whole lot with the other movies.
We did with 65.
Of course.
Because that's 133 minutes.
Yeah, it is a tight 90. This is also pretty close to that, which I
Yeah.
think adds to the classic 80s family movie feeling of like, you will get in and out of that story.
Yeah. Not 133. 93.
What?
65 is 93 minutes.
90. Oh, yeah.
An
yeah,
hour
yeah.
and 33. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anyway.
You just got to talk about 65 as much as I can.
Yeah. So ratings wise, it got a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes, 53 on Metacritic.
That is lower than I think it deserves.
I'm gonna look at
That is-
the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, because I feel like that is a movie critics would be harsher on in this day and age, but like
Yeah.
that was definitely higher than
63% audience score.
I would say higher than that even, but
Yeah. It's fine. Like, you will enjoy it, I think.
yeah.
So this movie had a budget of $75.3 million.
Wow.
So if it was released on theaters in like the traditional route, I don't know if it would have made back its budget necessarily
Yeah.
with the amount, or if it had the same amount of press that it had.
I mean, it had a decent press, I feel like.
Yeah. I don't know if it actually had a decent amount of press or if we were just really paying
We were
attention
into it, yeah,
to
that's
movies
fair.
coming out at the time. 75.3 feels like a big ask for this movie.
No, I mean, in comparison, 65 had 90 million, right? It was a 90
It was
million.
a 90 million, yeah.
And like that was a full CGI blown
Yeah.
movie with fewer actors, but that does mean that like most of the 75 million went to the actors on this
Yeah.
project, and then some special effects, obviously.
Yeah. So I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole of like, how do you tell if a streaming original movie is successful?
Sure.
And I found a couple things from this one place called Netflix Life, which is the most obnoxiously biased Netflix source that I have found, where it was like, isn't it cool that Netflix doesn't sell your user data?
I love Netflix.
Yeah.
And I hate sharing my password.
So basically, this quote that I found from it was just saying that streamers like Netflix started creating their own original content because of licensing issues. So when companies like Disney and NBC decided to create their own streaming services, they started taking back the content they created, such as hit shows like Friends and Disney movies. So what kind of streamer would they be if they didn't have content? That's why Netflix started producing original content. They have shaken up the movie industry because of its pay structure. They pay producers the full cost of production. Actors, writers, and everyone else associated with making the films are also paid upfront, which I do think is interesting.
That is interesting, but also that article is wrong because they started making original content before other streamers.
They've been a heavily biased Netflix source.
I don't work for Netflix.
Yeah.
You can't prove it.
It is a pure coincidence that my website is called Netflix Life. So it basically, they just kind of measure the success of a streaming original by like the number of subscribers that are around that time and a bunch of different algorithm things. There's nothing like your specific money is directly going towards this one production, which could be an interesting method, but also super obnoxious for users if that became the norm, I think. So
you wanted to talk about the director. 'Cause
Yeah.
he has also done other
Yeah.
horror-esque.
I'll also say that, like I mentioned earlier, this is based on the 2017 short story Ernest, written by Jeff Minogue, I think, who is also credited as a co-writer and executive producer on the film.
I like that.
The other co-writer was the director Christopher Landon, who is also known for the Happy Death Day and Freaky.
So he does adaptations into horror.
Kind of, yeah. He does.
Because Happy Death Day was Groundhog Day horror, and Freaky was Freaky Friday horror.
Yeah.
Okay.
His 3 recent Blumhouse films, I'm not sure when this article came out from The Hollywood Reporter, but in it says his 3 recent Blumhouse films cost less than $20 million combined. So it's a huge jump for him to go from the last 3 movies being $20 million combined to $75.3 million. And then, We Have a Ghost is apparently one of the projects that he wrote between Happy Death Day to You and Freaky, and he was pleasantly surprised when it actually got picked up. He has plans for Happy Death Day 3, has a full story and like is really invested and wants it to be a real thing. I know the first Happy Death Day did super well, or it overperformed, and then the second one did fine, but because it wasn't the same as the first one, then apparently the studio, in his interviews, he's saying that the studio is reluctant to have the third one because the sequel never does as well as the original.
Well, my thought is also just like, how many death days do you need?
He says this is the last one.
He wants the trilogy.
He wants the trilogy, and then he also wants to do a crossover with Freaky.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him for having all these ideas.
Yeah. Also with the huge jump in budget, I saw a thing, which I guess I didn't save, but in one of his interviews, he was talking about the process of filming David Harbour and the special effects for it, where they had to film every scene 4 times with David Harbour in it and out of it, and then everyone else in it, and then they rotoscoped him in and out of it.
Wow.
So they did all of that 4 times, including the massive car chase scene that's in the movie that we didn't really talk about, but there is a massive car chase scene.
Yeah, it's very cool. You should watch it.
Yeah. Yep.
So our rating of the movie, we have our rating system. If you aren't familiar with it, it is a 4-star rating system with 5 options. 0 out of 4 means oh no. Oh no,
Shouldn't have done it.
Bad movie, don't make movies ever again. 1 out of 4 is that was a movie. You could call it a movie. A 2 out of 4 is an enjoyable movie.
It happened.
You know, you can have fun watching it. It wasn't like anything like super special. 3 out of 4 is an enjoyable and technically quality movie. 4 out of 4 is, really good, Oscar-worthy, goddamn kind of movie.
You said a swear.
I said got. So my rating for We Have a Ghost was a 3 out of 4. I think it's a fun movie, and with what you're saying with the rotoscoping, like it was made really well.
That mine was also 3 out of 4.
Shocking.
I think it's pretty enjoyable. It was better than I expected.
Yeah.
The trailer didn't make it look bad, but
no, it just looked like
there was more to it than what the trailer showed, which is a good trailer, what you want it to do. And then I think it was pretty well produced, and it seemed like everyone had a pretty good time making it.
Yeah. So with each episode of this show, we're going to end it with discussing a different movie that we'd watched this year that didn't come out this year, because we watch movies outside of the movies that are being released.
Not to brag.
And I had something else planned, but because we mentioned that it was a 2022 release, I'm going to bring up Violent Night, which is the other David Harbour horror film, which was such a weird movie. It felt like 2 different movies were being made.
Yeah.
Like it's Home Alone, but with Santa Claus.
And people dying.
And people dying so much, and in wacky Christmas themed ways.
Yeah.
Not a great movie.
I remember like us sitting down and being like, oh, Violent Night is finally out on whatever streamer it is, maybe Amazon or something.
Peacock.
And then but like the automatic clip of the movie playing when you're like scrolling through things, and then we were like, what is this? This looks awful.
Yeah.
Where it was just some random shot of like going through the hallway, but the lighting is so bad.
It looked like a Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
Like it was really weird. Like that looked like a Hallmark movie, and a lot of the other scenes looked like a Hallmark movie, but then also a lot of scenes look like a really top tier cinematic
which
film.
it's supposed to be making fun of the Hallmark movie thing, kind of, but I don't think they were going for that level of detail of like, we're even going to make it look like it was lit by the Hallmark movie department.
Not great.
No. The rest of it was better than that one clip that they showed, but it was just like, why would you pick this one to play on your streaming service?
That would be a 2 out of 4 movie.
Oh, yeah.
My review for it on Letterboxd, it's no Fred Claus.
So few movies are.
And that's all it was. So there's nothing really more for me to say about Violent Night, I don't think. But it was a fun movie. And if you want a silly, dumb movie to put on, which is, I think, the theme of our other movies that we watch, I guess, because I feel like every time now it's been a silly movie that isn't really like a movie you have to watch, but a movie that is fun to watch. So, well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for watching the Year of the Movie podcast, the podcast where we discuss movies that have been released in 2023. As always, I'm Sebastian.
I'm Maggie.
You can find our content at Virtual Cocktail Recordings. We have another channel called Virtual Cocktail where we do our own films. And our social media is going to be Virtual Cocktail and all that jazz. So follow us there. Leave a like. Leave a subscribe. Leave a ring bell. And leave the episodes playing nonstop so we just rake in those
and just
views.
leave
And just walk away.
We're not good at talking to people.
And we will see you next time on Year of the Movie.